Willaim Wilberforce's action in the abolishment of slavery in Great Britain in 1833 positively influenced how people view issues of humanity and ethnic diversity today. Willaim Wilberforce was born on August 24, 1759 in Kingston upon Hull, United Kingdom, into a rich merchant family. Willaim Wilberforce had 3 sisters, but one died at age 8 and one died at age 14. Only Sarah lived to be an adult. At age 9, his father died and he went to live with his aunt and uncle. They had a tremendous impact on his early years, including introducing him to John Newton and his preaching. When he returned home, he enrolled at Cambridge University and became friends with William Pitt, the future Prime Minister of England.
And this aunt and uncle knew the Lord, and they were very fervent in their faith, so they began to raise Wilberforce to know the Lord. They introduced him to people like John Newton and John Wesley, and so he had a chance at a very young age to be around these men of God. And his mom got word that this was going on, and she was not comfortable with that. It was considered kind of socially unacceptable at the time. And so she had him sent back home, and he did not any longer have any Christian evangelical influence in his life. And he had a lot of friends. He was a bit of a partier in college, but he still did well in school. And he met William Pitt there, who later became Prime Minister of England. He and Pitt would go sit and observe Parliament. They would observe the House of Commons, and obviously they were both drawn to politics. They had a natural interest in it. They were both very bright, very driven young men, and so maybe it's not such a surprise that Pitt would go on to become the Prime Minister. Wilberforce would go on to be elected to the House of Commons.
As his time at university was drawing to a close, William decided to run for Parliament in 1780. He was able to win the seat in his native Hull, entering Parliament at the young age of 21. After 4 years in Parliament, William traveled to Europe with his sister and mother. It was during their European vacation that William had what he referred to as his great spiritual awakening. This encouraged him to lead a religious life, such as getting up early to read the Bible and spending many hours in prayer.
It all started when he was going on a journey, and a friend gave him a book to read. So he picked up the book because travel took a long time back then, and he needed something to pass the time. And it was a book called The Rise and Progress of Religion by Philip Doddridge. And it just shook him to his core and caused him to realize what really mattered to him.
And this created a crisis for him, as he wanted to live his life for the Lord, but refused to compromise on his morals and beliefs, as many politicians are known to do. On returning to England, he spoke with John Newton, one of the leading Anglican churchmen of his day, and a former slave trade captain. Newton inspired him to lead a religious life and to use his political position to fight for the abolishment of slavery and work for social reform.
He described this crisis to him, and he said, I think that I need to get out of politics. I think that I want to serve the Lord with my whole life. And John Newton said, wait, I think maybe the Lord has you where he wants you and where he wants to use you. You could be very influential as a politician, and your faith can inform your politics, and you can make a tremendous difference for our country and for the world. He wrote down in his journal 2 goals that he felt like the Lord had given him as a Christian politician. And he wanted to end the slave trade because he could see that that was evil, that was hurting people. And what he called the reformation of manners. And by manners, he meant morals. So he wanted to help reform the culture. He could see that there were a lot of things going on that weren't good, and he wanted to try to make a difference there.
Great Britain was involved in the slave trade for over 200 years. The transatlantic slave trade had started in the 16th century, and although it was engaged by many European countries, the British were the most ruthless practitioners. They developed a trade triangle, shipping goods out of Africa in exchange for slaves. It is estimated that over 2 centuries, more than 10 million West Africans were forced into slavery. At least a tenth of these wouldn't even survive the trip across the Atlantic, and many more would die that following year in bondage.
Ships would leave England and head to the west coast of Africa, and they would take goods from England that people in Africa might want. And in exchange for those goods, they would take people. So they took people from the west coast of Africa, and they would take them over to America or to the West Indies, where there were sugar plantations, sugarcane plantations, that sort of thing, where they needed more labor. They needed cheap labor. The interesting thing is, by the time the ships got back to England, the people in England never saw the slaves. So I think that made it a little bit easier for them to not realize what was going on or to turn a blind eye to what was going on because they weren't actually seeing it. But the people who would travel to those plantations and would see what was going on recognized the horror of it.
Incredible wealth was made by the British people and companies during this time. This made the abolition of slavery a moral and a financial decision in Great Britain. Following successful public campaigns by the Committee for the Abolition of the Slave Trade, Willaim Wilberforce was encouraged to try and pass a bill in the year 1789. Wilberforce spoke in the House of Commons, arguing that slavery was a matter of great injustice and contrary to principles of human dignity. He spoke passionately on the subject.
If to be feeling alive to the sufferings of my fellow creatures is to be a fanatic, I am one of the most incurable fanatics ever permitted to be at large. I mean not to accuse anyone, but to take the shame upon myself, in common, indeed, with the whole Parliament of Great Britain, for having suffered this horrid trade to be carried on under their authority. We are all guilty. We ought to all plead guilty and not to exculpate ourselves by throwing the blame on others.
In 1789, William introduced 12 resolutions in the House of Commons against the slave trade. Although there was considerable support within Parliament, the anti-abolitionists were well organized and they managed to outvote the bill, 163 votes to 88. Even with the support of his longtime friend and current Prime Minister, William Pitt, the resolutions did not pass. In 1792, William returned with hundreds of thousands of signatures on a petition. Unfortunately, the House of Commons chose a plan to end the slave trade gradually. William did not support the idea. Over the next 15 years, little progress was made due to the war with France. Thankfully, William continued his quest, and on February 23, 1807, a bill to end the slave trade in the British West Indies significantly passed 283 votes to 16. This act only made illegal the trade of slaves. Many slaves in the British Empire were still not free. Therefore, in the remaining period of his life, William Wilberforce campaigned for the rights of slaves in Africa and other parts of the world. Just 3 days before his death, Wilberforce heard the news that on July 26, 1833, the Slavery Abolition Act was passed, outlawing slavery in most parts of the British Empire. India would be freed from slavery a decade later. William died and was buried in Westminster Abbey next to his top friend William Pitt. Although he is best associated with the slave trade, William Wilberforce also campaigned for other social issues such as prison reform, education, missionary work in India, and issues of public health. William's personal life was dominated by his religious sensibilities. He married late in his life to the devoted Barbara Ann Spooner. In 10 years, they had 6 children. Wilberforce's faith in action and persistence to fight for the less fortunate was an inspiration to American heroes of humanity, Abraham Lincoln and Martin Luther King. Today, William Wilberforce offers courage to kids, women, and men across the world to not compromise on issues of humanity and ethnic diversity regardless of opposition and conflict.